No, it's new and delicious. That's the word that came to me. Oh man.
Take a bite.
How? Okay.
Cut.
They don't know what I know. They don't know like I know.
Okay. Welcome back to Engineering Podcast. I'm
Thank
Adam.
you. I'm Brian.
And we're here to talk about the same shit we talk about every week.
Yes. Super
And
interesting
say-
things.
Swear words in the first 30 seconds of the podcast.
And take our clothes off. Topless science.
Ooh. How long are you going to keep campaigning for that as the name?
I just feel like it's more the subtitle than the name.
Engineering, topless science.
I'm glad we're in agreement with the colon emphasis too. I was going to do the same.
I had a Joe, who
Joe C?
Joe Calendar,
Joe Calendar.
who's now killing it. We had like a running
Oh, yeah.
conversation around the office when we were working on No Apologies together about the
Colon.
colons, because he hates them. He just thinks they're ugly, and I love them.
Oh, I
I'm
think
all
they're
for
great.
like Die Hard 3 : with a vengeance.
I use colons all the time for things.
Yeah. I mean, you're
To-
supposed to. It's a grammatic structural element.
I use them probably 100 times a day when I'm writing emails or keeping notes for myself. I will give the title of the note, colon, and then a URL link on the next line. I don't know. It just feels right.
Because it's a tool and you're using it for what it's for.
It's a goddamn tool. Just because it's small and composed of two
Ugly
unidimensional dots.
Apparently ugly dots.
Hideous.
Anyway, welcome
Cue the
back
music.
to Engineering.
Welcome. Topless science.
So what do we got this week? Let's tease the big one first.
Oh,
And then we'll dip into the hit list. I'll explain structurally how we're going to do the hit list. from
wonderful.
now on, maybe. But first, hit me with the big one.
The big one today, we are going to discuss motors, electric motors, internal combustion engines, power generation. Something nice and easy and narrow and specific.
Right. I want to understand why I should buy an electric car.
Great.
And I
great
know
question.
that includes a lot of complicated scientific principles as well as ethical.
A lot of
and-
emotion.
But first, let's do the hit list, which we're going to do from paper for the first time. So this time we shared a doc with my list of shit I thought of.
Digital
and
paper.
Brian's just going to pick stuff. And so
Oh, good.
that's how we're going to do the hit list from now on. We'll see how it goes.
I like this format. We actually have already tried this format, but we failed to record everything we talked about.
So this is now our second time recording this podcast. The last one we got 45 minutes in before we realized the recording wasn't working.
Third time, I think, actually.
Third time.
Technically.
So we have consistently we've been trying. We do this remotely. Brian's in San Diego. I'm in Los Angeles, and we do it via video chat, recorded with another app. And we kept losing the recording on the video. So we have gone through a steady process of trying to figure out what the weak link in that chain is, because there's so much hardware in between the microphone and where it's being sent to him, going through the internet, coming out the other side.
Didn't we
You
do a
can hear it.
podcast about that? That was like a test
where
podcast.
We talked about audio quality. Yeah.
That was like before we were even doing podcasts, I think.
Right. That was just like, let's talk about some shit and record it so I can listen to it later and see if we sound worthwhile.
Well, look forward to a podcast about audio and recording.
But what we realized the last time we tried to do it, because instead, like, we realized really quickly that it wasn't working. And so we spent the 2 hours we block out for this troubleshooting. And what we've got it down to is it's an ISP problem.
Yeah. It's a internet bandwidth issue.
Like, and it seems to kick in at exactly a half hour of video chat when we use a service like YouTube. And we were planning our appointment to do it was at 7 p.m. on Monday, because that worked for both of us
Ooh.
after work.
Popular TV
Exactly.
time.
We realized that's prime
Internet TV
Netflix
time.
and chill time, which means
And what did we decide is not prime internet
prime
TV time?
Hulu time,
Prime Hulu, Netflix, HBO Go.
football time.
Oh, and football is on Sunday, Sunday.
So we're hacking
Are you ready for some football?
a vague suspicion that 80% of our country is watching football right now, which is going to be over different information channel than the internet. And we're using it.
My
to
roommates
try
are
to get
using
the cleanest
bunny
signal.
ears to watch football
Right.
right now.
They're upstairs using HD rabbit ears, right? Over air. And so
nerds can do things on the internet right now because normal people aren't fucking using all of
Right.
our bandwidth.
I wonder if people that game a lot were already familiar with this phenomenon. You know,
Maybe.
like you
It's
think
been a long
gamers
time
are-
since
are
I've done a
like,
lot of gaming.
You know, it's a good time to play Metal Gear Solid when everyone else is watching football.
Guys, Monday Night Football kicks off at... Oh, interesting, though. That fights our hypothesis. There's Monday Night
Oh, you're
Football.
right. Anyway, so we think we got it. Here we are recording on
Go.
a Sunday afternoon.
Get 'em.
Because everyone else is watching football. Certainly, Sunday is. I mean,
Shit
you're
is-
right. Monday fights the hypothesis, but that's one game
Fuck
that a
that.
lot of people might not care about.
That's just anecdotal anyway.
I want hard data. Remember, we made a TV show called
Oh.
Hard Data once.
We need a second colon. It's engineering, colon, topless science, colon,
Hard data.
hard data. All right, let's get
Okay,
to
so
some
let's do it. You got
topics here.
the hit list in front of you. What sounds interesting? If I
Hit
remember
list.
any of
Oh,
these
let's
are
do-
anymore.
Let's kick off with Noun Project, which segues nicely into that second one because they're both interesting. But
You put that on there, so you tell me about the Noun
Uh,
Project.
the Noun Project.
The
is
nounproject.com.
Nounproject.com. TheNounProject.com. It's this website. I don't know what the organization, if it's like a nonprofit or just like a dude
I
or
think
whatever.
it might
But
actually be the United
for-
States Patent and Trademark Office.
oh, that's super cool. Then it's this project that I've been following for years. For some reason, I'm on their email list. I just find it interesting where they're trying to make an icon for every word or phrase or concept in existence. They have like hundreds of thousands of little kind of uniform black and white icons, like icons that you see all over the web or in applications. And you can look up like anything and pull icons for it. And just something seems powerful and useful. It's like cross language and it's cool. It's simple.
Well, it's visual.
I don't know.
It's probably a language. Character based. I mean, I guess every language is character based, right? Pictogram based,
but not like word
right.
character based.
The same space that would be occupied by like maybe 4 letters clumped real close together is now occupied by a picture worth 4 words.
I wonder what the perspective would be if you came from a language that is like pictograph based, which I hesitate to name any because I'll say the wrong ones. Egyptians? Yeah, it's an interesting project. I just think it's neat. And from a graphic design perspective, I've done a lot. It's always a pain to find icons. And now you can kind of go to one resource and they've got some free stuff. They've got some pay stuff.
Since the first time you told me about it, I bumped into it, I think in Wired magazine. And they were talking about the trademark offices, the USPTO's interest in the project. Because if it's open source, then you have this set of icons that other people can't copyright.
That's really nice. More things need to be not copyrighted or patented. Side note, Microsoft, Google, I think has patented or has tried to patent. Imagine, for the listeners, a visual cue. Imagine putting your thumb and index finger to kind of like a point, like you're pointing a little gun at someone, and then put them together as though you're making a little square to shoot like a video or a picture. They have patented that gesture or copyrighted or whatever the fuck you would do with that gesture, because with their Google Glass, you can hold that up and it'll snap a picture. Fucking kill me. That kind of shit needs to go away.
Yeah.
Fuck
some of that, like
the lawyers that are doing
there's
that.
a real problem.
Someone should stand up and say, no, how about you make the business entity of the company just sell this effectively, and I won't patent it because that's me being a dick.
It's interesting because I've been studying a lot of that stuff in school in terms of like patent law, IP law, and it's the idea of protecting the expression of ideas in order to promote people to work on them because if they can make money off of them, they will, is rooted. It's like Jefferson's idea.
It's a powerful idea, and it's really functional when it costs $1 billion to develop
Right.
an antibiotic, but not functional when I put two finger guns together.
Well, and so the idea is like
that's stupid.
the all of the stuff of trademark and patent law has to do with how long you're allowed to maintain that exclusivity that you earned by putting in money and effort to make the thing so worthwhile, right? For a trademark, if you can imbue it with meaning, you can protect that as unusable by someone else as long as you continue to use it, like a logo or something.
Would it be interesting to force people who have patents to like annually submit some sort of economic statement that shows, hey, it's costing me this much to build it and maintain it, and I'm making this much off of it? And so you kind of calculate how much longer it's supported based on that. Like you're allowed to make 5 times cost or something.
Patents, maybe, right? So yeah, so when we're talking about copyright and patents, then it has an inbuilt expiration of copyright is like 70, a lifetime plus 70 years or something like that, which is a really long time.
A totally reasonable length.
For you to own whatever thing you created. And a patent is shorter. It's something like 20 years. The idea being you should be able to protect it for a certain amount of time, but then there's certain extension guidelines and stuff like that. But I think when you're talking about tech stuff and like, we're going to build a thing to do this,
finger gun square,
and then 2 years later, that product has completely failed. Like it should expire. You're right. It should be some kind of merit-based thing you have to reapply for.
I don't know the details, but I believe the UK or maybe the EU has rules that your patent needs to be actively marketed and sold, or else it goes away, which is super useful.
Like it's become a problem in the tech sphere because people are able to patent really nebulous things, and then they just sit around and go after people that actually execute on those things.
Yeah.
Because this iteration and like the process of trying a new thing, deciding it didn't work and giving it up, turns over so fast in the software world that Google should have 2 years to do something useful with that gesture. And if they don't, they can't have it anymore. Like they shouldn't get to hang on to that for 20 years as a thing. I mean, Google Glass is already a failure. Like, and so now they have that. I
don't think we want to commit slander on our podcast. Is that slander? Google Glass is cool. We just have different opinions. Oh, I hope you're going to break out your Google Glasses and then.
I was, but I can't remember where they are. I should hang them in a more prominent space so that I can be reminded of a really stupid way to spend $1,200.
Oh yeah, can you sell those on eBay for like $12 now?
Nobody wants them.
Maybe we should put them in a blender.
Which is why I think the failure assessment is apt. It's not slander. For one, it's not slander if it's true, and also it's opinion. I have not looked at numbers.
Slander has to be false.
What?
Slander has to be false
and damaging.
Okay.
So you calling me an asshole is protected speech.
Okay.
Because I can't prove I'm not an asshole.
Reasonable.
Basically.
Okay. Wow. Noun Project really got trumped by a side conversation.
Yeah, it completely did. But this is relevant because it kind of flows into this next thing, right? So we're talking about how long something is copyrightable
it does. Damn, good segue.
So the next thing that you wanted to hit is libraryofwords.info.
.info.
Which I think only exists as a thought project executed in real time when you type something in.
I think so too. Or I'm certain of it.
But it could conceivably, with enough space to store it, actually exist.
Right.
And so in copyright law, the way something is protected as copywritten and owned by someone else is if it's fixed and if it's original are the first two hurdles. So you can't copyright an idea. You can only copyright an expression of an idea.
Okay. Does fixed mean like written down?
Right. In some, or recorded in some form. It's fixed in medium. It's physical, whether it's on a hard drive or waveforms, video, written.
Brains don't count, though.
Right. It exists somewhere other than your brain.
Okay.
And it's original.
Okay.
The second that comes out of you, you own it and you can defend it in copyright like immediately.
Okay.
as copywritten material. This website has taken, I think
This
it's
is cool.
320 words,
It's irrelevant because it
Right.
it becomes everything. So we
but
can
it's
kind of
taken
describe
a
it as though it's
string
everything.
of 320 words and every word in the English dictionary and run through every possible 320 word combination of every word in the dictionary.
It's really hard to describe.
So in that 320 word, so in this database, theoretically, is everything that could ever be written in the English language up to 320 words.
Right.
Think
Every
about stuff
single
that's
combination of every page. That's roughly like a page in a book, right? So every
Yeah.
page of every book that's ever been written is in this database because they've done every order. The first page is 300 and whatever times. The last one's like xylophone, 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 xylophone.
Right. But so then if you could also then take every one of those entries and put them in every possible order of
Right.
300 entries, then you now have every possible English language book without punctuation ever written
Man, this is such an interesting
up to
project.
300 pages. So
Every-
it's fixed in a
every-
medium and it's original.
Every
but a
time we talk
person
about
didn't
this,
make it. So do you have the right to copyright that?
right?
If this guy runs this algorithm onto a hard drive, can he then start to sue people as his running Google search for a chunk of text he already has that's coherent?
He could under
pops
current
up,
law, I think,
Could
right?
he go after them for a copyright violation?
Your Honor?
Probably not, because
What's your finding?
maybe the problem is punctuation. But if he worked possible punctuation
interesting.
combinations into this, then you might start to run into a problem. Like it wouldn't actually, his case wouldn't succeed because I think a judge would say, well, it also has to come from a person or something.
So back to the concept, though, because it's so interesting. Every time we talk about it, I think of new implications. Isn't one of the implications that the actual every word I've spoken in my entire life is captured in there somewhere in the order I've spoken it? So my life has been written down inside of his database. Everything I've ever said.
Yeah,
I think
man.
it is.
320 words. That's news reports,
It's
obituaries,
everything. It's like everything ever written or
classified ads,
said. It's a really cool concept.
Tinder bios,
Tinder bios. You can fit a lot of Tinder bios into 300
tweets,
words.
lots of tweets.
It's a neat website, and the person who created it has some really cool copy that describes it, and we'll let you realize what it is because I don't think we've done it quite justice. But
Yeah,
check it out.
I think
Library
it's
of
based
Words
on an old philosophical
.info.
It's based on an old thought experiment called the Library of Babylon or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. The Bag of Babylon.
But the crazy thing is, like, in terms of computational power, that's not a hard thing for a computer to do.
Not
Arrange
to
those
fake
things
it, yeah.
in iterative fashion like that. The question is,
you
how
can
much
actually-
storage space would that database take up?
More than we have on Earth. You wouldn't be able to store this actual information. So the concept of is this copyrightable doesn't matter. His system mimics it by like generating on the fly. If you search for a sentence, it'll take that sentence and then randomly generate stuff around it.
Right.
But it's a really cool thought experiment. Everyone
It
I've
is.
shown it to, nerd or not nerd, has just been like, huh. So scope the website. It's cool.
So yeah, go see if you can interrupt the football game upstairs for that. Guys,
They'll love it.
turn it off. I gotta show you this website.
Because I want to tell you about the library of words.info.
But we'll put
Totally,
links
we'll
to this
pause it.
stuff.
We'll pause the game and pick it back up in 2 minutes.
That's completely doable. But then they might start getting tweets about the outcome.
But what if we miss something?
We completely ruined. Okay.
Sorry for being a dick,
I think
everybody.
that's it for the hit list.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
So let's do it. Bam.
On to
Engines and motors.
motors and engines. And...
Right. So let's start here. What's the difference between an
Ooh.
engine and a motor? I feel like colloquially they're occasionally interchangeable, but mechanically speaking, they're two different things.
That was my first thought when you just said that, and I was like, ooh, I don't actually know what the definition difference would be between those two. Engine, traditionally, I think of engine as like a internal combustion engine that's like, I don't know what the difference is. We should have looked up the actual definition of these two words.
Right. We should have started that far back. But I
Maybe
don't
they
know
are
that
just
we really need
interchangeable.
to. It doesn't matter, right?
Irrelevant.
Mechanically speaking,
What's the difference between an electric motor and a gasoline engine? Oh, I hope you're going to pick up a little gasoline motor.
oh no, that would be great. You have a motor in your. You have that that vacuum
I-
motor in your
I think
closet somewhere, don't you?
I have shitloads of motors in my room.
Yeah,
I have
totally.
no gasoline engines though, I don't think.
Right. And that's a
Although I
great
could.
example of the difference. You could not, even on a tiny scale, like to fly around your face, you couldn't use a gasoline engine to power that thing.
They do make tiny ones.
They do.
I don't know how tiny
But
though.
it would sputter out fumes
Yeah.
and fuck up the air in your
Yeah, it's
bedroom.
gross.
And it wouldn't. It's not realistic.
It's gross. Well, let's talk about each individually so that people kind of get a conceptual model of what they are. Because I'm always surprised. The engines are complicated, and people I don't think generally know like what is going on
Well,
inside
and
of them.
what's really cool is the difference at the end gets us to questions of efficiency, power usage, like what you should do to spew less carbon into the air and the possible
Yeah.
impact of that.
Stop breathing.
It's actually a
farting.
really simple mechanical difference that makes it so that Tesla can brag about their car beating like Porsches off the line. And
Yeah.
if you understand what that difference is, it's kind of not impressive that they beat Porsches off the line. Like, of course
Yeah.
they do. They are employing completely different technology to generate forward motion, and that technology just responds faster.
That also draws attention to the fact that it's probably not super important to go from 0 to 60 very quickly because it doesn't solve any problems, which is always kind of a core tenet
It's
of
a
our
bullshit. It's a
podcast.
stupid. It's like last week we were talking about megapixels, right? Like at a point that was important for that sensor. And in a very specific context, 0 to 60 is maybe important.
right when
But
you're
you-
in your 20s and you're a male.
So back to the difference about
Yeah.
with the mechanically speaking, the difference between an engine, an internal combustion engine, and a motor. Is it that rotational thing that I was talking about before? Is it? I mean, is in essence one just you put electric current into and it generates rotational force?
Yeah.
And the other one
well,
you're running a whole process to catch linear motion off of an explosion
yeah, they're very different.
and
Exactly.
transfer it into rotational.
An internal combustion engine, real
Energy.
simply, you have a bunch of explosions, and those explosions push something forward, and then that ultimately gets, because of a bunch of linkages and bearings and shafts and stuff, you end up getting rotational motion that can like spin a wheel. But it's powered off like a firecracker, basically. And then an electric motor is much simpler, like mechanically, it's simpler. You use magnets to spin something. And the way the magnets are oriented and the way you spin it, it's just kind of, it's just made rotate. It's rotational energy right away. So it just works the way you want your wheel to work. So it's simpler and there are less parts and they're completely different in how they work. But a gasoline engine, super complicated, tons of parts, tons of mechanical pieces and stuff.
And so part of what's interesting is in that idea of capturing, like, so when a molecule or molecules interact to create the explosion, they push out in all directions in a sphere, right?
Yep.
And so you're trying to capture that outward motion, which is linear because it's pushing away from the center of the explosion,
Mm-hmm.
and turn it into spinning
Yeah.
motion.
There's actually there's an internal, I'm sure there are lots of models like this, but what's it called? The Wankel engine, I believe, is an engine. I don't know who else uses it other than Mazda has it in like their RX-7, RX-8.
Like that
It's a rotational internal combustion
right,
engine,
pretty
and you can
similar.
look it up. It's really interesting how they do it. They, instead of pistons, it has like a little very specifically designed kind of triangular shape, and the explosions happen around it, and so it ends up spinning it. It's just very hard to make it reliable because the way it's built. But it's a production engine. It's
But
cool
supposed to
because
be
it's
more
smaller.
efficient and smaller.
It is.
I guess.
It's very small. Like you get the same horsepower out of an engine that's like a quarter of the size
Right.
or volume.
Well, so that sort of carries
anyway.
us into this question of efficiency, right? Like let's break down like what it means to be efficient,
Yeah.
but start from like the explosion of gas. I don't know if you've ever taken, like, for the listener, if you've
I've
ever
exploded
taken
everything.
a small quantity of gasoline and just lit it on fire, like a thimble full, it goes Like it's not. It's so what that engine is doing is taking the force with which that happens so quickly when you just light it on fire and dissipating it enough. Like if you could take 100% of that force and turn it into rotational momentum, you would just break the mechanical pieces that move the car. Like that's why if you drive over a landmine and it explodes, it doesn't push you forward faster. It just blows the pieces of your car apart. Like so they're taking an explosion of
example.
the same energy capacity and they're running it inside your car.
Little
then,
explosions. That's
yeah,
why the car's so loud.
right.
Go
And
like lean on your hood when your car is running. It's terrifying in there.
right. and they're dissipating that energy down to a usable level. And so the question of efficiency in that context is how much of that energy generated are they actually using?
Totally.
Right.
It's a really cool question because it gets into a lot of different things. And one of the neat, well, first of all, so I think generally when you look at car engines, they run at like 25 to 30% efficiency, which means of all of the energy output you can get from like a cup of gasoline or a gallon of gasoline, 60, 70, 75% of it goes to something other than moving the car forward. And it goes to heat mostly, I think, is heat. Like your engine's really freaking hot when it's running. That's why there's a radiator in your car. And then it goes into friction and it goes into moving these big heavy parts of your car. I mean, your engine weighs hundreds and hundreds of pounds. It's a major component in the weight of your car. And so a lot of that energy just goes into that stuff rather than rolling my car forward. So it's really inefficient. If you think about every 3 gallons of gasoline that you put in your car, 2 of them might as well have just been fucking poured on the ground because only one of them is pushing it forward.
And some of that you just described is because of the mechanical properties of the engine.
A big part
Some
of it, yeah.
A good chunk of it is also that we have to dissipate it because there's so much force.
We have to.
That. So, like, not to go too far afield, but when you think about how a rocket engine functions, a rocket is one of the most effective like means of propulsion using that explosive force because it's way more complicated than this, but it's essentially a giant tank with a nozzle and you light that nozzle on fire and squirt fuel on it and direct that explosion so that you can go forward like
that's
off
a great point.
The planet.
Yeah, you're not rotating a wheel on a spaceship. I bet you're right. I don't know off the top of my head, but I bet the efficiencies are really high on a rocket
really
engine.
efficient use of that fuel.
Yep. It's just a directed explosion.
But it also demonstrates the power of that reaction. Mm-hmm. And so just to make an engine not kill you, they're already having to employ a bunch of mechanisms to make sure that that spray of gasoline is tiny and then like it only blows up a certain amount and they're trying to make it as efficient as they can.
There's also really interesting...
And you end up at 20 to 35% efficiency.
Right. There's an interesting component of an internal combustion engine that I should be able to explain better because it's basically what my college degree is in, but I can't because I got really bad grades in those classes. They were very hard. But there's a theoretical maximum efficiency you can get out of an internal combustion engine because of the way you have to heat things up and then cool things down to kind of expand and compress the air and the gas inside of the engine. And so if you look at any internal combustion engine, just from the start, the very start of it, they can generally only get, I think, to like 50 or 60 or 70% efficiency at an absolute maximum, no matter what you do. If you built the perfect internal combustion engine because of the way they work. So they are they work well for cars clearly in the world, but they are a poor choice when you're trying to be efficient with energy and fuels and pollution and forward propulsion.
Right. And later we can talk. But so here's the thing, and we'll come back to it later. They're self-contained, which is of value.
Pour some gas in and you're good to go until that gas is gone.
Yeah, exactly. But so first, let's talk about motors, electric motors. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the batteries, but how really does that apparatus actually function?
You essentially, there are a bunch of different types of electric motors, but roughly you can think about you run an electromagnet. I don't know if people are generally familiar. You can put electricity into a magnet and it turns on and does stuff. And so
it's not magnetic unless you run current through it.
Right. And so you run electricity into an electric motor and essentially you use the magnetic field, which it creates kind of a circular force, and you turn a piece inside of it. So you essentially are using a magnet to spin a piece of metal, and that piece of metal goes out to a shaft and spins your wheel. So the way it functions, it in its essence, the force is rotational already, and so there's no conversion. It's different where an internal combustion engine is an explosion that you're directing in a direction and then has to be mechanically turned into rotational force. An electric motor just naturally does that. That's how it works.
So they run on electricity instead of
Yes.
gas. And so
Yes.
you're controlling it with that current that comes from a battery rather than a tank full of explosive chemicals.
Yes.
This is also kind of like talking about the digital, like last
Don't
week's.
let's not demonize the word chemicals.
No, I
It's a
don't.
pet
mean
peeve
to.
of mine.
I don't. No, well, I mean everything's chemicals. I'm made of chemicals.
That's my shitty response to people too. Everything's
that-
chemical. Okay, I've got that out of me. Sorry.
Oh, it's fucking true though.
Oh,
No,
it's
but
so
like
true.
we talked about it last week, right? Like because the fact of needing to use noxious chemicals for things creates a lot of inconvenience in life.
Yeah.
Like for developing photography, like photos, we were ruining pants.
Nice.
Because you know,
what a horrible situation we were in.
Like,
Another
to get
good
a
reference to our
picture,
pleated khakis.
you had to go through. I mean, I used to ruin. I don't know. I mean, eventually I realized it was going to be the case, and I just had a pair of pants I wore in the darkroom.
You were especially sloppy in the darkroom.
I like shaking shit around.
Yeah.
It's fun to shake those wobbly photos around.
Hey, shake it if you got it, I guess.
So that electricity stored
Yeah.
in batteries.
Yep.
There's a trade-off problem here because those batteries are almost as
trade-off.
heavy as a motor.
They're pretty fucking heavy, yeah. And batteries are really, relatively speaking, inefficient. Like the amount of energy you can store in a gallon worth of battery is not anywhere near the amount of energy you can store in a fucking gallon of gas. Those units don't work.
We didn't.
in that,
we left
but
this part out of the motor explanation, though.
the concept is
That
good.
motor turns the current into forward momentum at something like 85% efficiency. So
It's really high, yeah, I think.
So it's better at turning that form of energy into forward motion than an internal combustion engine could ever be at turning gas into forward motion.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Like you were talking about before in terms of the stuff, like, you know, the
Right.
principles
Yeah, the
of
best
physics
internal combustion
that you
engine.
studied in college.
Right.
Right.
Studied.
So, but you need to store that in batteries. So you're losing a chunk of efficiency at the level of the battery, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you losing more than
Black
what it
hole
would
yet?
cost to just use gas instead?
Man, you start to get into the black hole of where this becomes complicated really quickly, because we're discussing different types of efficiency all of a sudden. With the engine, the gas engine, you're talking like a chemical efficiency, like converting
It all
gasoline
burns.
into carbon
Once you set it on
dioxide and
fire,
oxide and
yeah.
water, and then with an electric motor, you're talking about the efficiency of extracting electrons from the battery, which is kind of a chemical reaction. But then you're talking about like the mechanical efficiencies, which was we kind of glossed over in the internal combustion engine. And you very quickly get to the bigger question, which I think where we're headed, which is, what about all the upstream stuff? What about electric generation? And
Right.
what about
So where's
the
that
gasoline
power?
industry?
So no matter what, the energy, we're talking about transfer of energy, right? You can do it on site in a car with chemical
Mhm.
reactions, or you can kick that generation basically further up the stream, right? Which is a thing I think that people that pay attention these days are aware of, because one of the arguments that people make against you should get an electric car is, well, you're still just burning fuel somewhere because that's how
Right.
we generate electricity. So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. And
Which is a really fair thing to question, I think.
it's a fair thing to question, but I don't think it's right. But and the reason that it's not right is because people don't understand this efficiency component at orders of scale, which is what you're talking about, right?
Right.
Because so let's back it up to we talked about this a bit in the first episode in terms of nuclear reactions, but like in terms of generating electricity, a nuclear reactor is just heating up water that drives a turbine that generates electricity.
Right. They should be called nuclear heaters, I think was our reference in that other podcast. Because you just use a really complicated thing, nuclear fission, to heat up water and change it to steam.
And so
That's
if you're
it.
burning natural gas,
It's like a windmill.
you're doing the same thing. And if you're burning coal for energy,
Same thing.
you're doing the same thing. Everything just drives a turbine that generates electricity, and then we're able to store it in batteries. And there's a little bit of efficiency loss because of the batteries, but they're pretty good at storing and then returning to us usable electricity. They take up more space. They're heavier than we'd like, but it still is probably a better option than carrying the gasoline with us for all the secondary things that come out. It could be. Right. But overall, this whole system is better because...
Should be.
Explain to me the difference in efficiency between being able to operate the mechanism that captures the energy from that explosion at the size of a room instead of an internal combustion engine. Right.
Well, there's a general concept that really, it almost seems to be a universal concept, like kind of a rule of our universe, which is you get more when you apply economies of scale. When you're a business and you make a product and sell it, if you make more of them, you make more money because you can make them less expensively. If you have, and in this case, like when you have a gasoline engine in your car, if you can move that to a big facility and make it bigger and more specialized and add more components to it that capture more things and make them more precise, you just get better efficiency. So a gasoline engine in your car might be 30% efficient in turning gasoline into forward motion, whereas a turbine engine that runs at your power plant that runs on gasoline, which none of them do, but think through it that way, they'll be able to make it more efficient. So maybe it'll run at 45% efficiency or maybe 60%. It'll be really close to that theoretical maximum of power generation because it's specifically designed to just generate electricity. Whereas the internal combustion engine, there's a trade-off. You're moving the engine, you're moving your power generation source with itself. So they're trade-offs. It can't be a huge room size thing. It can't dissipate heat at the rate that a big generator in a power plant can. There's other problems.
Right. Well, so that's an interesting. Well, so there's another interesting point though. No, because talking about the burden, so think about that equation in terms of space travel.
Ooh, I would love to.
There's a burden when you're talking about a mode of transportation imposed upon the whole system by the weight of your own fuel.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an interesting trade-off because that fuel gets burned up and you get lighter.
Mm-hmm.
Batteries always weigh the same. Well, I mean, when they're charged, they incrementally.
Very, very minutely less.
Right. But
just like
they weigh the same, right? So in one sense, there's a constant in terms of what this device is going to weigh in order to carry the energy to push it forward, which is nice for calculations, but not as nice for the efficiency equation.
Right.
But all of that still doesn't seem to stack up to an electric car being less efficient than an internal combustion engine.
And the theory is, the concept that we are to believe that sort of makes sense is the electric car is more efficient because you move the power generation upstream, which can be made more efficient. And it's funny though, because you're left in one of these situations that are very prevalent in the world right now, where you have to choose your information source or sources and come to your own conclusion about who you trust and whether you trust them, because there aren't individuals running power plants. You have to trust a big power company to say, hey, these are my efficiencies. This is what it looks like. You have to trust Elon Musk to say, we've done research and here it is. Our cars, it's more efficient to drive this than to drive a gasoline powered car. And
in some sense, those are controlled by regulatory bodies, right? Like there's some threshold in which you can control that, because you don't get to be a power plant unless you report X, Y, and Z faithfully. Right. But only to a certain level. And then there's weird global X factors, like China lies about that shit constantly. Like they just got busted lying about it by some really harmful factor. Like last week, it turns out they've been pumping out 300 million more tons of carbon than they were telling us.
Turns out some major car manufacturers have been doing the same thing.
Right.
So this is really complicated.
This is why you need certain amounts of regulation, right?
Right. Why it seems like one might want certain levels of regulation. I'd like to remain editorially neutral on our podcast.
Right. I don't. It. Sometimes you need it and you don't, and it's like, so when we talk about these bigger conversations of law and decentralization that we have not yet done on the podcast, but we tend to go off on occasionally
Yeah.
in our personal lives. It's interesting, man. Like, how much of that can you hand off to
Super
personal
interesting.
responsibility, and how much of it
So
has to
interesting.
be on a regulatory body with inherent trust?
Right. And it's a
don't know.
lot of resources too to track all that stuff and to figure these things out. Because take batteries for instance, there's a lot more to it than just the power generation. Batteries they're a relatively new technology, and they require a lot of really harmful chemicals and materials to make them. And to have them, they exist. They hold a lot of things that are harmful. It's why you're not supposed to just throw your batteries out. And so, what's the cost of that? Is the cost of polluting with harmful metals, heavy metals in all of these batteries, is that better than carbon dioxide into the atmosphere? All of a sudden, it's not calculable anymore. It's kind of
Right.
I'm not sure. I ruined a river, or I ruined the sky. What the fuck do I do? You know?
It kind of seems like the biggest problem right now is the
It's tough.
globe heating up, and so
The globe.
so the carbon, as far as what we
Seems like
are
a big
told,
problem.
at least, the carbon seems to be the biggest problem. Okay, argument against Tesla that you hear in the media, which means at some level people are going to have familiarity with it, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
whether it's coherent or not, or relevant or not, is that dirty power is a problem, right? This idea of dirty, like, that's a buzz term used to make it
Dirty
sound
power.
negative. That
Like CO2
like,
emitting power plants.
right. So coal
kind of thing,
and
right.
natural gas are still spitting
Mhm.
out carbon in order to provide you with your electricity.
Yep.
Solar
Yeah.
and wind are not. And that's why they call them clean. But they're only clean relative to the carbon output problem. But that seems like a pretty big problem.
Yeah.
But forget the argument of we should get on more clean energy, like,
Mhm.
nationally. But if right now you were going to go buy a Tesla, the power would probably come from coal.
Depends
or
on where you are
around
in the
Los
world.
Angeles, nuclear maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. US is not mostly nuclear. I think making this up, my brother's going to nick me, but 20% nuclear in the US maybe. France, for instance, I think is 100%.
I mean, you can find reports on this stuff. There's
It's
a lot
all
of
over the
people
place.
that are
It's really
100% nuclear, which is dirty in one sense, clean in another. There's a
Right.
lot of solar.
It's
know,
pretty
it's
fucking
happening,
clean in every
right?
sense. I think.
I mean,
But
other than the
again,
waste that really can.
Maybe my brother would
fuck up
fight
your
with me.
universe.
It can be really bad.
But so the reason that it's, if you've got to burn something to drive your car, which we still have to these days on some level, it's better to burn it at the power plant, where you can have this giant mechanism more effectively capture as much of the explosion's energy
Yep.
as you possibly can, run it through a wire, which doesn't cost you much, to a battery,
Right.
which stores it pretty effectively and then generates forward motion.
Yeah. Keep in mind there are so many levels of efficiency that need to be addressed at all those steps too, which is super interesting, but too much to talk about.
No, totally.
And the
Unless
conclusion,
you want to hear it, let us know,
Yeah.
and we can dig in.
Totally.
This is all
I would
stuff
love
that
to.
we understand and can look up, but
Love it.
I'm driving toward the specific
My
thing
conclusion
here of,
personally is the hypothesis is reasonable, and an electric car should be a better use of fossil fuels, which it essentially is for the most part, and they're a good move forward
but the answer, I think,
for the
might be,
environment.
if you have a decent, if you're driving a Prius right now, don't go sell it to get a Tesla. Because there's
Definitely
going to
don't
be
do
some
that.
cost in materials to produce that car as well. And if people need to replace cars, it's probably better to do it on the cycle of just when you would replace it with a car anyway, with another car.
Yeah.
Go electric. But, like, we're not under some crisis to have everyone get rid of their cars and buy
I think that's a
Tesla.
really interesting point. Yeah,
Right.
you bring up a good point. Like making a new car and throwing the other one in the trash, which isn't exactly the cycle, but kind of is. Maybe don't rush out. You don't necessarily need to replace your car this second with an electric vehicle, but it's a good direction to
If
head.
you want to do it because the Tesla is cool as shit, and it's cool as shit, by all means, go for it. But
It seems
that
to be
it's
a nice
good for
car.
the planet is the argument to use once it's time to replace your car.
Yeah.
So I think we got
What's-
the difference. I think we got the message. I'm good. let's get out of here. Thanks for listening. Same deal as always. Follow us wherever you found this. Hit us wherever you found this with questions, and we'll answer them, or we'll work
Which
them
could
into stuff.
be Instagram.
So do
I hope it's fun.
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
Zengineering Podcast on Facebook. Right?
Zengineering Podcast. I don't know. Just search. That's what everyone's going to do anyway.
Just search for us, because
One
we don't
typed
have this shit written
addresses.
down yet.
On the fourth episode, like somebody will, they will have found us through a channel anyway, and we will persist on that channel.
We'll
That's
get
all
our
that matters.
marketing together.
Right. So as usual, if you're still here, thanks for hanging out. This has been another Zengineering podcast. I'm Adam.
Brian, have a gloriously bright, wonderful day.
They don't know what I know. They don't know
Uncomfortable. Moving on.
all the time.
I giggle so much during this that it seems fitting that I giggle at the end.